One of the most frequently asked questions about Portugal on this channel is, where do I find a house if I'm relocating to Portugal, whether on a job seeker visa, on a D2 visa, a D7 visa, a student, and so on and so forth. I will tell you for a fact that it is not easy to find houses, especially in the big cities like Lisbon as well as the Algarve, and nowadays even Porto has become quite crazy to find a good apartment. And so this video is to guide you on where to look and the pitfalls that you need to be very much aware of so that you don't fall into these pitfalls, because I have been there. I've seen people talking about the things that they have gone through while looking for a house, and especially if you're not yet in Portugal, then it becomes even way more difficult to find a good and a legit landlord who would want to rent the house out to you. So stick around until the very last minute so that you can be able to get the information that you need, and then you can begin your search and have a peace of mind. So in the first place, it is very much common to find houses on Facebook Marketplace as well as Facebook communities in Portugal. It doesn't matter whether it's in Lisbon, in Porto, or in the Algarve. You can find houses listed in various communities on Facebook, and people asking whether anyone would want to rent their homes. Some of them might be very seasonal. So if you're looking for a house, for example, in the Algarve, please note that in most cases, you might find that they have a very small rental lease period, which would mean maybe 3 months or 6 months. And so beware of that. Now, beware as well of scam artists that are on Facebook, because there are quite a number of them. So people who ask for money before you can even be able to see that house, and then they go mum on you, and then you have already paid so much money to them. So please make sure that you're not paying someone until you potentially see this house, or you're able to see a legit contract that is registered, and you can be able to say that yes, this is a legit person, this is a legit location, because there is lots of that happening. Now, one of the main websites that you will find popping up whenever you type where to find houses in Portugal is obviously Idealista. Idealista.pt shows quite a number of houses, whether you want to actually even buy a house or even rent an apartment or a shared apartment whereby you share the common areas and you have your own bedroom. So there's lots of houses that are usually listed on Idealista every day. However, also that website could have loads of scams. So again, be very aware that you're not gonna pay money before you can be able to see the house as well, or see a legit contract that has been registered, and then you can be able to pay money. So Idealista is one of the places where you can simulate and be able to see a house, whether it is to rent or to also buy. Other websites, if for example you're coming to study in Portugal, that would be very helpful, or maybe you're coming on a job seeker visa, which means that maybe your stay is like 3 months or 4 months, or maybe if you extend it could be at least 6 months. You can find these houses on places like Uniplaces, Sportahome.com, OLX, Sapo.pt, again on Facebook Marketplace, Facebook communities, whichever one you join, or even on WhatsApp. Sometimes you can find some really good communities on WhatsApp, and you can find an apartment in these communities. Now, you could also find on other websites like Guarantor. We also have Virtual. Again, filter through to see exactly what is being offered and whether a house is legit or not, because there is a lot of scam artists on this website. Another place that you could feel very comfortable looking for a rental house or a house to buy is with the real estate agents. And real estate agents, as much as yes, they have loads of houses to actually sell, they also have the option of rental houses. So rental apartments, you can find most of these apartments listed on the major real estate agencies, and this would include things like Century 21. We also also have Era Point PT, Remax Point PT. We have lots of others that have come up which are not as big. However, they do enlist their houses that are out there for rental. And the beauty of it is that in this case, you work with a housing agent and they can be able to let you know whether this house is out there for rental or what happens. Now, one other catch that you need to notice in Portugal is that in most cases you will find landlords asking for way more in terms of rent. Obviously, it's very expensive, especially in cities like Lisbon. However, depending on where you decide to settle, then you can find cheaper houses in the villages or in the outskirts of Lisbon or in between the center of Portugal or the north of Portugal. And however, depending on where you work or where you're going to school, then this would be very important for you to check out. So for example, if you have your school in Lisbon, I would suggest you staying away from Lisbon and commuting to Lisbon Central. That way you cut down your costs significantly. And if you're not against commuting, long commutes, you can stay in places, for example, like down in Setúbal or Sintra areas along the Sintra line or along the Castanheira de Ribatejo line. Depending on how you feel in terms of commuting, then this is something that I would definitely recommend so that you are not going crazy. If you're in places like Porto, then you can find outskirts of Porto where you can live easily. If you're in, like for example, Coimbra, if you're studying in Coimbra, then it is actually cheaper to live in places like Coimbra. It is cheaper to also live in places like Braga. If you're in the Algarve, it becomes quite expensive, especially in cities like Albufeira, in Faro Centro, in Lagos. So you can find maybe houses that are further from these locations. It's also very expensive in places like Portimao because it's very much well known. So you can find houses further away from where your work is or where you're studying and make it make sense, because the commute can also be quite a lot. So please make sure that you also do your own research to see the distance between where you want to rent the house and where your daily activities are located. Now also, another thing that you will notice with Portuguese landlords is that they in most cases will ask for a guarantor for your house, especially if you are a foreigner. And this guarantor is somebody who, in case you do not pay the rent, then they can pay the rent on your behalf. Now, this guarantor in most cases can be someone who is already a resident in Portugal or a citizen in Portugal. And if you do not have this guarantor, then most landlords will ask for a higher deposit. So which means that you could find even places where they ask for 1 year deposit, which sometimes makes no sense, or 6 months or 3 months or 4 months. However, you could negotiate this, but it is no guarantee that the landlord will accept this, because it is a means of security where they ask for extra amounts so that they can know that for sure you're going to be able to pay the rent for this particular house. Now, they would ask for documents, for example, where you're working, your work contract, your IRS declaration, which is your tax declaration, in other words. They can also be able to ask about who you are exactly. I have had landlords who ask you to basically tell them whom you are, what you're doing in this country, and so that they can know for sure that you're a legit person. So this is something that happens quite a lot. If you're listening to this and you're from Kenya, this is not something that maybe you're very familiar with because it doesn't happen in Kenya. So be aware that these are things that are normal to be requested for so that you can be able to get a house. Now, there are also other several co-living spaces, for example, nido living, that have come up in central places, for example, in Cascais, in Lisbon, in Porto, and these housing areas are are almost instant to get the house, because you basically just look at the house online and you are able to book it almost immediately after paying a certain deposit. However, these houses are co-living spaces, so which means that you would find other people living there. Maybe they've come to work for a short period of time, or they've come to study for a short period of time, and they're living in those apartments or studio apartments, or maybe one bedroom and suites, or maybe they are just studios and penthouses that are within the city center or in other places, for example in Faro as well as in Porto, and then they would be renting these places not for the long term, but at least this can be also a place where you can rent, especially if you're coming to Portugal as a job seeker and you are on a job seeker visa, and then you just want a place to begin with, maybe for the first 3 months or the first 4 months, depending on also your pocket, because they tend to be very, very expensive as well. Also depending on where you're going to live, because like Lisbon Central, if you compare it to places like in Faro or in Porto, could be a little cheaper in Porto or Faro, and so on and so forth. So I do hope that this video has given you an insight of where to look for houses when you're moving to Portugal. Of course, it's an uphill task that you have to keep on looking. Sometimes it can be very elusive, the houses can be very elusive. However, if you are already in Portugal, then it becomes a bit easier, because if, for example, you find a very befitting house on places like Idealista, you can request the landlord to go and see that house so that you can make a decision as to whether or not you want to rent it out. So if you want to buy a house, once again, you would definitely be able to go through a real estate agent, for instance, or a property lawyer, or if you found a house that is maybe listed on Idealista by an owner directly, then maybe you can find a property lawyer or a mortgage broker, and then you guys can have a discussion as to whether or not you want to buy that house. Obviously, this is a very bureaucratic process, because there is a lot of paperwork to be done in that field if you want to buy a house. And so I hope that this information helps you and gives you a guidance on where to exactly look for houses or for shared apartments if you're moving to Portugal. And once again, keep subscribed, join my membership on this channel so that I can be able to give you more value and sit down with you and tell you exactly what to expect, so that you're not stranded at the very last minute when you're moving to a country within the European continent. And until next time, keep subscribed. Bye.